See, with CFA, one of the major component that you want to study as a part of your syllabus is asset valuations. Okay, and this is divided into 4 segments. The first important segment was equity. The next one that we will be studying from today is bond markets, or we will also call this as fixed income. You will have to study alternative investments and derivatives. So these are the next 2 types of asset classes. Okay. Now we've already done this part, which was about equity, which basically helped you to figure out that how do you find out the intrinsic value of an equity share. Now the next subject that we are starting today is going to be about bond markets or about fixed income securities. Okay. Now see, the trick with this subject is that about 60% of fixed income is more or less theory. Okay. Especially for us, it's going to be all the more difficult because Indian bond markets are not very developed. So with equity, if you pick up Economic Times, you would get to read at least 10 stories in a week's time. But with bond markets, there would be less association that we will be get to use, because there are a lot of instruments which do not even exist in India about which we will be studying. Okay. So 60% of fixed income is divided into theory, and remaining 40% is computational part, okay, or numerical part. Now this part is something that you will have to, of course, focus on. The computational part with fixed income becomes a bit mathematical. Okay, so if you're someone from an engineering background, you're going to really enjoy this part. But if you're not, then probably for you, the only way out would be practicing a lot of questions. Okay. So we are starting with the first topic, which is more or less introduction of what debt securities really are. So there is something called bond indenture. Now when a company decides to issue equity, it is supposed to issue a document. Do you know what the document is called? Yes, it is called as prospectus. And what is the job of this prospectus? Yes, it would basically give information about your company to the shareholders. Right? It would give them all that information which will help them come with an informed decision whether he wants to buy or he does not want to buy. Am I audible back there? So now the way for equity, we will have prospectus. In the same fashion, if a company decides to issue bonds, in India we also call them as debentures, then that company would issue something called as a bond indenture. So what is this? It's a simple agreement, okay, that this agreement would exist between a bondholder and the company which has issued these bonds. Okay. Now, what does this agreement would have? This agreement would have various clauses, and these clauses would be called as covenants. So what are these covenants? And these are of 2 categories, affirmative and negative. So let's imagine that we decide to give loan to a particular company. Okay. That means we decide to invest into bonds of a particular company. Now, if you're given a choice to put some restrictions, what restrictions would you like to put on that particular company to make sure that your bond payments are made effectively? So what do you think, Vaibhav? They should not sell the assets, of course. So why? Because assuming that these bonds are secured, and in case if there's a default, you will have a right to at least sell those assets and recover your money, isn't it? So one of the covenant that you would put is that company would not be allowed to sell these particular assets. Okay? So that's one. And since you are prohibiting company from doing something, this would be called as a negative covenant. What else? They should not issue another Yes. They should not issue another set of debt. Now why? Because, of course, whether the reissued debt is a debt with second charge or whether it is a debt which is typically in India called as a pari passu issue. So what does it mean? Let's say that I have this set of assets with me and I secured my assets and I recovered or I collected debt of, let's say, 100 CR. Now, these people who purchased these bonds, these people will have a right to sell these assets in case if I default on these payments. Now I decide to issue another set of loan of 100 CR. Now, if I give charge on these assets, if I also give this next set of bondholders right on these assets, but I tell them that you would get a right only after the first set of bondholders have received their entire amount outstanding, then this would be called as second charge. Okay. But if I am issuing these bonds and I am telling my second bondholders that they will have an equal right, the right that these bondholders will have, you will have the same level of rights on these set of assets. That means if these set of assets are sold for 150, then both of you will receive 75 and 75. So then that kind of an issue would be called as pari passu. Okay. So though this is out of your syllabus, but what you need to know is that of course, if company keeps on issuing debt, that's going to affect my position as a stakeholder in the company, because the same cash flows would be now divided between two sets of bondholders. So that would be again a negative covenant. What else? Yes, maintaining certain ratios. And as a bondholder, you would be involved into two sets of important ratios. One would be the long-term solvency, and that would of course be dependent on debt equity ratio. And the second one would be short-term liquidity, because company should generate sufficient cash in order to make sure that you receive all your bond payments. So if you're asking them to do certain things, then these are called as affirmative covenants. Okay, so affirmative means maintain certain ratios, do certain things. Negative means you're prohibited from doing or taking certain sets of actions. So bond indenture, it's a contract that specifies all the rights and obligations of the issuer and the owners of the fixed income security. This defines the obligation and restrictions on the borrower. Negative covenants, it would include the restrictions on asset sales, negative pledge of collateral, restrictions on additional borrowings. Affirmative covenants would mean maintaining certain ratios and timely payment of interest. Now, next point of discussion. If you feel that I'm going a bit fast, you can stop me. See, it means, it's slightly complicated, but see what it means is that you already have given certain set of collateral. Okay? So in fact, there are various, you know the difference between mortgage and hypothecation? Does anyone know the difference between the two? Paridhi? Difference between mortgage and hypothecation. Yes. And that, what would be hypothecation then? Okay, anyone, Kshitij? What kind of assets generally we hypothecate? Yes. Yes. So what would be the difference? Yes, but why? Exactly, yes. See, the difference here is that with hypothecation, your assets keep on rolling. Right? If you say that I am securing my inventory against this loan. So if bank says that don't touch this inventory, how will you do your business? Right? Because what is your business? You want to process your inventory and then sell it. So that inventory amount would keep on rolling. That's hypothecation. As against this, mortgage or a secured charge would mean that if there is a fixed asset, without the written consent of the bank, probably company would not be allowed to sell that asset. Whereas with inventory, you can do that. Now what this means is that you have already given some sort of collateral, and then you cannot create a pledge on that collateral again, which is called as second pledge or negative pledge, that you've given an asset and on that asset you don't want to create one more pledge. That means on the same asset you don't want to take another set of loans. Okay? So it's the same thing, but this restrictions on additional borrowing is more from a perspective of solvency ratio, because this might affect the debt equity ratios. This means that the same asset you cannot create the same level of collaterals again and again. No. It's the same thing. What it says is that if you've already secured a particular asset, you don't secure it one more time, or you don't pledge this asset again for one more additional borrowing. Okay. Features of bond, various coupon rate structures and structures of floating rate security. Okay. So now let me send some basic understanding on bond markets. See, when you invest into an equity, you would expect to earn return from increase in the price of that equity share, which is called as capital appreciation. And you would also expect to earn return by receiving certain cash flows, which would be called as dividend. Now, the risk that exists here is that this capital appreciation might be the other way around as well. That means that value of your stock might reduce substantially as well. Now, if you want to play safe, if you do not want to take so much of risk, then what you can invest your money is into a bond. So let's say we're making simplistic assumption here that you invest into a bond and you invest 1000 rupee into this bond. Okay? So this 1000 rupee would be called as market value of the bond. Now every bond will have a number which would be called as face value. So let's assume that in this particular example, the face value of the bond itself again is 1000. So market value is 1000, face value is 1000. This face value used for two purposes. The first important purpose is that every bond will have a predefined maturity. Every bond will have a predefined life. So at the end of maturity, let's assume this to be year 5, you would receive some amount back from the company, and that amount will always be the face value of the stock or face value of the bond. Okay. So no matter at what price it is trading in the market, though it would not trade at a different price, but the amount that you will receive back from the company would be the face value. That is use number 1. Use number 2 is that during the life of the bond, so this is year 1, 2, 3 and 4, you would receive certain cash flows, and these cash flows are called as coupon payments. So these coupon payments are always calculated as a percentage to the face value. These coupon payments are always calculated as a percentage to face value. So let's say if we have a coupon rate of 15%, which means that all the bond holder would receive 150, 150, 150 and 150 in year 5, and he will receive his 1000 back. Now, it is not necessary that the bond will actually trade at 1000 rupees throughout his 5 years. Okay? The way an equity share is listed on an exchange, in the same fashion a bond can also be listed, and the price of this bond in the market might become 900 or it might become 1500, and the price of this bond will keep on moving during the period of this 5 years. But if you're an investor who intends to hold the bond till maturity, your face value of investment is in a way assured. The only way you might lose this face value is if the company makes a default. Are we clear? So that is the reason why that bonds are considered relatively less risky and safer investment avenues considered to equity investments. Now, this is something which is initially a bit difficult for people to understand. Okay? That let's say we purchased a bond at 1000, it is going to give us a coupon of 150, 150, 150, 150, 150 and 1000. Now, since it's giving us 150 on 1000, which is a face value, we know that coupon rate is 15%. But what happens is that on this day, when the bond was issued at 1000, this would be called as issue price. The bond would be listed on a exchange where people can buy and sell it. Now next day, this bond might not necessarily sell at 1000, it might be higher or lesser. So the price of this bond in the market would primarily be dependent on something called as market YTM or simply market interest rate. That interest rates in the market will keep on changing, and based on the price of this bond in the market will keep on changing. So let's say that we are here on this particular day and we find out that interest rate in the market is about 10%. So depending on which direction these interest rates have gone, the price of the bond is going to change. So can you quickly calculate at what price this bond will sell if the interest rate is 10%? Find out the market price of this bond. 1100. All of you got the same number? No, at time 1, year 1. We've done this when we did a topic called long-term liabilities. How much? 1100. See, how would you do it? Value of bond at any point of time is equal to present value of future cash flow discounted at current YTM or current interest rate in the market. So current interest rate in the market is 10%. Future cash flows are 150, 150, 150, 150 and 1000. So on your calculator, second clear TVM, 150 is the payment, 1000 future value. Now see this carefully. I am going to consider only the future cash flow. This is the current cash flow. I am not going to consider this. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. 4 is the N. Compute present value. 1158. So the value of bond today is 1158. If the interest rate have changed and it has become 10%. If interest rate in the market was not 10%, if the interest rate in the market was 20%, find out the value of bond. It is 870. So again, what we can clearly see is that if interest rates in the markets are decreasing, then the value of bond in the markets are increasing. If the interest rates in the market are increasing, the value of bond is decreasing. Yeah. So now, if you are an investor who purchased the bond at 1000 and you are intending to hold it till all the 5 years, then every year the return that you are earning is the coupon rate, which is 15%. But if you are an investor who purchased the bond at 1000 and sold it at the end of 1 year at 1158, then you are actually earning return from two sources. Number one is capital appreciation. Because you purchased the bond for 1000, you sold it for 1158. And number two, the coupon that you are going to receive, which is 150. So the way on equity markets we can earn return from two possible sources, which is capital appreciation and coupon. In the same fashion, even in the bond markets, you can earn return from two sources, capital appreciation and the coupon payment. Are we clear with this? And if you are a bond holder, that means you've purchased a bond, that means you are long on a bond, then you would want interest rates to fall down. You would want interest rates to decrease, because see, logically, when interest rates have decreased, if the interest rate in the market is 10%, all other bonds would be giving coupon at the rate of 10%. Whereas the bond that you've already invested in, that's giving you a higher return at the rate of 15%, so your bond becomes more valuable. Okay, so bond features. First one, maturity. Every bond will have a predefined maturity. Number two, par value or face value. This is the principal amount of the fixed income security. Okay, so I'm skipping this part. Coupon rate is the amount of cash flows that would be paid. Now see, these coupon rates can be either annual or these can be semi-annual. That means coupon would be paid twice in a year. And another important thing is that at times coupon rate would be fixed. So in our example, we had annual coupon of 15%, but coupon rates can also be variable. That means that every year the amount of coupon that is to be paid, that would depend on what is the rate of interest that exists in the market. So if the rate of interest in the markets are very high, you would receive a higher cash flow. If the rates of interest in the markets are very low, you would receive a lower cash flow. That is called as a variable coupon bond, or at times we will call this bond as a floating rate bond. Are we good to move on? Now, there's something called option-free bond, which are also called as straight bonds. Now, the best way to understand this is to first understand what are option-embedded bonds. So there might be two possible categories of option-embedded bonds. Embedded means that those bonds are in a way combined with a certain set of options. Now, this options is what we will be studying in depth when we do derivatives, but at this stage you think of them as a financial instrument that gives you flexibility. So now there might be two types of bonds which might have these options. The first ones would be called as callable bonds, and the next ones would be called as puttable bonds. So what are callable bonds? Let's say that company has issued a bond, face value 1000 and coupon rate of 15%. So this is how the cash flows are going to be: 150, 150, 150, 150 I'm assuming maturity of 5 years, and 1000. Now what happens is that somewhere here, okay, at the end of year 2, the interest rate in the market falls down substantially and the current interest rate in the market is now 6%. Who's benefited here? Company or the bondholder? Bondholder, because in the market the rates are 6%, but he would get to earn 15%. So in that case, what company can do is they can decide to exercise their rights and exercise rights of being able to call back the bonds from the shareholder. Okay? So with these callable bonds, you can write down that right is with the company, or right is with the issuer, the one who has issued the bond. That what he'll do is he will be able to force the bondholders to sell the bond at a predefined price. Okay? So there would be a call price which would be predefined, which will be a part of the indenture, which was a part of original agreement. And at the end of year 2, the issuer will be able to buy back these bonds from the bondholder, and bondholder will not have a choice. Are we clear? Anyone wants me to repeat this part? Okay. Now, yes, so benefit for investor would be that since he is assuming extra level of risk, at inception, when all other bondholders were given return of 13%, probably he would be given return of 15%. So of course, see, in market the risk is automatically being priced. So if a bondholder perceives more risk, there would be some amount of compensation that would be given to him somewhere or the other. But from our perspective, how do we have to think is this is that in this case, the company gets protection from a substantial fall in interest rate. Because what company can do is, let's assume that company can buy back the bonds here at 1000 rupee again. So company will buy back the bonds and it might reissue the bonds again at the current market rate of 6%. So that way company would be able to save that incremental 9% for next 3 years. Yes, in a way, but though this logic doesn't work there. But yeah, callable shares and callable bond, yes, you can buy back both of them. With puttable, now the things are going to be the other way around. So again, you're a company, you've issued a bond, 150, 150, 150, 150, 1000 and 150. Now, at this stage, the interest rate in the market have become 25%. Who's benefited now? Company, because the cost that it is still incurring is only 15%. So what can happen in this case is the shareholder might decide that I want to sell back the bond to the company and I want to receive 1000 or whatever is the predetermined price there. So in this case, I said shareholder, I should have said bondholder. In this case, the bondholder will have a right to put his bonds to the company back and receive a predetermined price from the company. So put holder or puttable bonds, this right lies with the bondholder. Okay. And he will have a right which will force the company to buy back the bonds from the bondholder. Are we clear with this? So this callable bond is nothing but a simple bond plus an extra feature given, and this extra feature is called as call, or at times you also call this as call option. This puttable bond is nothing but a regular bond okay. This might be a bit difficult to digest, but this would be bond minus a call option, because see, if you will see from a bondholder's perspective, he is purchasing a bond, but he is giving a right to the issuer. So when you give a right, that means you've issued something. Okay, or if you're just finding it difficult, so don't worry about this too much. So this would be clear when we do derivatives, but this would be bond minus a call option from a bondholder's perspective, and this would be bond plus a put option. Okay. Or in any case, what we want to understand there is that there would be option embedded bonds which might be callable or puttable. So if there is a bond where there are no options at all, that means a simple bond structure, then we will call this as a straight bond. Straight bond means that there is neither a call option nor a put option. Option free bond. Yes. Minus bond plus call would be company's perspective. Are we good? Okay. This is something which is really interesting. Zero coupon. See, what it means is that we have an investor who's worried about his daughter's marriage. So what this guy says is that 15 years from now, I would require a lump sum amount of, let us say, 30 lakhs so that I can take care of this obligation. Now, what he wants is, he wants to invest some amount today, but he does not want any cash flows to be received in between. Okay. So when he receives these cash flows, which are called as coupons, then it becomes a coupon bond. But if he's not going to receive the cash flows, then the one without coupon would be called as a zero coupon bond. So he would say that I want to invest some X amount here in such a way that at the end of 15 years from now, it should become 30 lakhs. Let's say the current interest rate in the market available is 15%. Can you find out what amount he will invest here? 30 lakhs is your future value. 15 is IY. 15 is N. Compute present value. 3.68 lakhs. So when he invests 3.68 at the end of 15 years, it would automatically become 30. Now see, in this case, he's not being given any cash flow in between. But that does not mean that he's not earning interest. He's earning interest, it's not giving to him in cash. This is a typical structure of a zero coupon bond. So there would not be any coupons in between, but an investor would be benefited by the appreciation in the principal. Now, in US markets, we'll come across an instrument which would be called as T-bill. Okay. So these T-bills are typically zero coupon instruments. Okay. These are zero coupon instruments, or these are also called as pure discount securities. Both of them mean the same thing. Pure discount securities. And what it means, these would be a very short-term instrument, let's say of 90 days. So an investor would probably invest, let's say $97, and at the end of 90 days, he would receive $100 back, which is again an example of zero coupon bonds. Next one is step-up notes. These will have a coupon rates that increases over time according to a specified schedule. Now, fair enough, from a theory perspective, this is what we need to know. But how do you use them from a real life perspective? Let's think from the issuer's perspective. That you are an issuer, and in what scenario you would like to issue zero coupon bonds? See, one thing that you remember is whether you're issuing zero coupon bond or a coupon bond, your cost is same. What you're differing is you're differing the payment of coupons. So in what case, as an issuer, you would prefer a zero coupon bond as against a regular bond? No, we are on the zero coupon bond as of now. See, yes. Let's say that you're in a business of construction, okay, or you're into infrastructure and you've taken a government project. Government has promised you that at the end of 4 years from now, we will pay you 5,000 crores on the completion of this project. Now, you need some money to build this project today. But what you know is that in year 1, year 2, year 3, you would not be receiving any cash flow, you would not be receiving any revenue. So if you raise the money by taking a bank loan, from where would you pay that interest? Because you would not be earning any revenue. So what you can do is you can issue zero coupon bonds. So if you're going to receive revenue of, let's say, 5,000, you can probably issue 2,000, 2,500 amount of bonds depending on what is your requirement. Use that money, complete your project, when you'll receive 4,000 or 5,000 CR back from the government, you can use that money and make the payment of zero coupon bond. That means you would try to manage your cash flows with the cash flows of the bond payments. Are we clear with this? In what scenario you would prefer to issue a step-up note as against a regular coupon bond? When the market rates of interest going down. Okay. No. Okay. See, I'll just write down a simple structure for you. This is not perfectly mathematically correct, but just to give you an intuition. There is one bond which takes 1,000, gives you 150, 150, 150, 1,000 and 150. As against this, you have a choice to issue this bond 1,000, 50, probably say 150, and then say 300. Okay, let me say this 200, and then 300 and 1,000. Let's make this as 100. Okay, so this is not mathematically correct, but just to give you an idea that the first one is a regular coupon bond, the second one is a step-up note. Why step-up note? Because the coupon rates are increasing. So in what scenario you would prefer to issue a step-up note as against coupon bond? Yes, exactly. That you invested into a big project, the revenues would start coming to you at a later stage. So in the first few years you might have revenues, but which would be lesser than what you would have in the later years. So you want to make sure that your major outflows are going at the end of life of the project, not in the earlier years. So again, depending on what structure you want to issue, you would make sure that you are integrating that with your cash flow management, your cash flow forecasting. So if you're receiving very early cash flows in the earlier days, your bond issuance would be different. If you're going to receive cash flows very late, then the bond that you want to issue is going to be different. And exactly the same logic applies for the investor. Right? So if your daughter is, let's say, very young, so for the first few years you would receive a schooling fee, and which would keep on growing. And then when she goes to the college, probably you would need higher university fees, so you would start receiving higher coupon amounts. Okay? So even from an investor's perspective, you try to do cash flow management. Okay. Now, as far as the cost to the company is concerned, it's going to be same, and I'll show you later on with calculations. So don't think in terms of the cash flows, don't think in terms of the cost that I'm going to incur. The way prices of these bonds are calculated in such a way that cost of these bonds from the company's perspective is always same. So it's not the cost which is different, it's the cash flow management which is different. Are we good to move on? No. See, if you keep your step-up note as an option embedded, especially a callable, puttable would not make sense, investor would not give up. A callable, a company would always call back when it would increase. Right? So that way you can't cheat, isn't it? Cash flows. Yes, but you don't have to do that on your own. See, the only thing which is going to happen is that the rate of return that you're earning is going to be same in all the three options. It's just that the cash flow that you're either receiving very late or either receiving very early. What you're saying, for that we have a different instrument, okay, which are called as inflation protected securities. We'll do them later on. See this, okay, let's do it mathematically. I'll explain you how it means. See, the current interest rate in the market is, let's assume, 15%. This is the current YTM that exists in the market. Let's assume a bond of maturity of 4 years with a coupon of 150, 150, 150, 150, 1000, 1000. This is a regular coupon structure. An investor gets to earn 15%. Correct? Now, let's say there is a step-up note which will give you 50. then it will give you 100, it will give you 200, it will give you 300, it will give you 1000. What you do is take present value of all these cash flows at the rate of 15% and take a total of them. Let's do this together. So since we want to do it quickly, I'll tell you a faster way of doing it. 15 divided by 1.15. Sorry, 50 divided by 1.15. STO1. 100 divided by, or hold on a minute, 1.15 x square, 1.15 x square inverse into 100 STO2. 1 by x, inverse is 1 by x, 1.15 square inverse into 100 STO2, 1.15 y raised to x3, 1.15 y raised to x3 inverse into 200, 1.15 y raised to x4, 1.15 y raised to x4 inverse into 1300 STO4, and then take total of all the 4 memory slots, RCL 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. How much? 440.8. Okay, 993. Or if you feel that this is a lot of calculation, then simply insert these numbers into your cash flow function. So cash flow 150, cash flow 200, cash flow 3 200, cash flow 4 1300. Insert your interest rate as 15% and calculate NPV. 993.88. Now, this is a step-up note which would be available to an investor at an investment of 993.88. Rohit. And he would receive 50, 100, 200, 300 and he would receive 1000. Now you want to know what is the rate of return that this investor has earned. Okay. So how would you do it? Say cash flow 0 is minus 993. Cash flow 0, make sure that you do second clear work. Cash flow 0 is minus 993.88. Cash flow 1 is 50. Cash flow 2 is 100. Cash flow 3 is 200. And cash flow 4 is 1300. Insert all these numbers into your cash flow function. Are you done? Then press the IRR button and say compute. It has to be 15. Because I'm actually doing the same thing. First I asked you to discount the values. Based on that I use the present value and then I asked you to calculate the interest rate. So the answer had to be same. See, the intuition here is that in both the cases investors would get to earn 15% and 15%. But in this case investor would receive 150, 150, 150. Whereas here he would receive 50, 100, 200, 300 and in fact his initial investment will also be lesser than this 1000. Okay. So you price the bond in such a way that investor does not earn more than 15% if that's the current YTM. If it's a zero coupon bond, I will keep this as 1000. I will keep 15% as IY, 4 as N, compute the present value. Again, I will get the price of the bond in such a way that investor is still earning 15%. So the rate of return that investor is earning is same, but the cash flow timing is different and therefore this is more about cash flow management. Are we good? Okay, now this is interesting. See, there are various risks which are associated with investment into a bond. And one of the very important risks is called as reinvestment risk. Okay, so meaning of reinvestment risk is that in this case, when you receive that 150, in order to earn a return of 15%, the way we had an assumption with IRR, the same assumption applies here, that this 150 should be again invested at the rate of 15%. But not necessary that when you get this 150, the rate in the market is 15%. What if the rate in the market is 3%? Then you would get to invest this 150 only at 3%, and then you are actually not earning 15%, you are earning less than that. So with zero coupon bond, the benefit is that there is no reinvestment risk, because you do not receive any cash flow. So when you purchase a zero coupon bond, you are actually going to earn 15%. With a coupon bond, you will earn 15% if the rate throughout this period in the market remains 15%. So that you get to invest all of these cash flows at the rate of 15%. So we'll do that part later on. Let's not try to do everything together. Okay. Deferred coupon bonds, it would initially make no coupon payments, and then at the end of time of the deferral period, the accrued interest is paid, and the bond would also make regular coupon payments until maturity. So if there's a bond with life of 10 years, this is time 10, this is time 0. You purchase the bond here. It will not pay you any cash flow for the first 3 years. Why? Because till that time the cash flow is not being generated by the company. At the end of year 4 or year 5 onwards, it will start making you payments towards the regular coupon, and it would also pay you the accrued coupon or the coupon that was not paid to you during these 3 years. So that kind of a bond would be called as deferred coupon bond. Are we good? A floating rate bond. Now get this thing right. There is a very, very important number which is called as Libor. Okay. So this Libor is London Interbank Offered Rate. And what is the meaning of this Libor? What is this rate? This is a rate on which currency? US dollar. And this is a rate at which? It's a reference rate. It's a rate at which one bank, Bank A, might give a very short-term loan to Bank B, and these transactions are happening outside the US. So Libor is a rate at which, this is a short-term rate at which one bank might give loan of a short-term maturity to the other bank. Now generally all these transactions happen outside the US, and there's a logic behind this. See, this Libor is calculated, or it was earlier calculated by International Bankers Association. Okay, this was a body, it was an association of bankers in London. Now what happens is that in US, the risk-free rate is US Treasury rate, or the rate US Fed rate. Now what is being said is that this rate is under the control of the US regulation, and therefore this rate might be manipulated and it might not show the correct demand and supply of the market. So to gauge the correct interest rate that exists in the US system, you generally use the Libor rate, which is outside the US but loans on US dollar. Now how this rate originally was computed, that if this A bank gave a short-term loan to B, then it would report that rate to this IBA, this banking association, and in the same fashion all these banks who giving loans to each other, they would report these rates to IBA, and then IBA was supposed to calculate a mathematical average of this and then disclose this rate. Okay, so this was a voluntary process, and now Libor assumed a lot of importance in international markets. So a lot of transactions, a lot of swaps, or a lot of type of financial products are based on what is the Libor rate in the market. Now A is a bank and B is a bank. Okay. So A wants to give a short-term loan to B. If it perceives that bank B is a really healthy bank, the rate of interest would be lesser. But if A gives loan to B and if it perceives that bank B is a risky bank, then the rate of interest would be higher. So Libor is a rate at which banks are giving loan to each other. So Libor would also tell you what is the general level of risk that exists in the banking system. This Libor would give you an idea as to what is the level of risk that exists into the US banking system. So it is being said that this International Bankers Association manipulated this Libor. They manipulated and they intentionally reduced the size of the Libor so that the banking system risk in US was compressed. It was not shown at actuals, and therefore the entire system of calculation of Libor has now been changed. Okay, and they are trying to bring more transparency into the system. But yes, what we need to know is that how we are going to use Libor. Libor is a rate that would keep on changing based on the lot of variables that exist in the market. So if I purchase a bond, okay, and for simplicity I'm going to assume 1 year reset dates. I'll tell you what this is. That let's say maturity of this bond is 5 years. This is time 0, this is time 1. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I purchase the bond with a face value of 1000. I am supposed to receive some amount of coupon here, some amount of cash flow here. That cash flow would be given to me based on what was the Libor or what was the floating rate that existed at time 0. So if this was 10%, the coupon that would be given to me would be 100. If this rate is 15%, then the coupon that would be given to me would be 150. If this rate is 7%, if this rate is 7%, the coupon would be 70. If this rate is 17%, coupon would be 170. This is 9%, coupon would be 90, and this rate will not be put to use. Okay. And these rates on which you receive the coupons and you also set the coupon rate for next term, these are called as reset dates. Okay. So now what you need to remember here is that you always receive the coupon based on the Libor of one period earlier. You always receive the coupon based on what Libor existed a period earlier. So at time 1, you would receive the coupon rate based on what was the interest rate at time 0. At time 2, you would receive the interest rate or you would receive the cash flow based on the interest rate at time 1. And what is the intuition behind this? If you take a loan of 1 lakh rupee, interest rate today is 10% and you have taken the loan of 1 lakh rupee. The day on which you decide to pay the interest into the market or you decide to pay the interest to the bank, interest rate in the market is 15%. Will you pay interest at the rate of 10% or 15%? 10%, because during this period, it was the 10% that existed in the market. So exactly the same logic applies here, that if the interest rate here was 10%, the interest that would be paid 1 year from today would be at the rate of 10%. If interest rate here is 15%, then you would receive 150 here, so on and so forth. So this structure of a bond would be called as a floating rate bond. Are we good? Yes, reset dates means the date on which the coupon for next payment is being set. So all these dates are your reset dates. Yes, we'll be doing that. It's easier than the normal coupon bond, but we'll do it when the appropriate LOS comes. Yes, it's a rate that keeps on changing based on the prices at which one bank is giving loans to other. From bank's perspective, it is the YTM means interest rate. So if bank A gave loan to bank B, then bank A is going to earn that interest. That interest is called as Libor. Okay. Now there's a small hitch here that I don't want to make it too technical, but let's do it slowly. Okay. So let's go slowly with fixed income. Otherwise, it might become too much in very little time. Is the speed okay? Are you finding me slow? No. Okay. Alright, there would be something called as a cap. Okay, see this. If you are a floating rate lender, okay, if you are a floating rate borrower, that means you've taken a loan, you've issued bonds at the rate of, at floating rates. Then what is the risk that you perceive? You perceive the risk of interest rate increasing or perceive the risk of interest rate decreasing? You're a floating rate borrower. Are you more scared about increasing interest rates or decreasing? How many of you think decreasing? Try not to sleep. If you're a floating rate borrower, are you worried about increase in interest rates or decrease? Increase. Because if the rates increase, then you would be required to pay more interest rates. So, meaning of a cap is that let's say I issued the bonds and those floating rate bonds will have a cap rate of, let us say, 8%. So what it means is that if the actual rate is 3%, I will pay 3%. If the actual rate is 6%, I will pay 6%. But if the actual rate is 15%, I will pay only 8%. If the actual rate is 17%, I will pay only 8%. There would be a cap on the maximum amount of interest that you would be required to pay as a borrower. And there would be a cap as to maximum amount of interest you would receive as an investor into this bond. Okay. So there might be a cap. And what is this cap? It would put an upper limit on the maximum amount of interest to be received or paid. And the way there would be a cap, let's say that you're a floating rate investor or you're a floating rate lender. Yes, the people who are sleeping. Now you're worried about decreasing interest rates or increasing interest rate. How many of you think decreasing? Okay, you're not sleeping now. So if the rates decrease, then the cash flow that you would be receiving is going to be lesser. So then there might be a floor to protect you. Okay, so the meaning of cap is, this is a cap at 8% and this is a floor, let's say at 3%. It means that when interest rates fall, the minimum that you have to pay and the minimum that other person would receive would be 3%, which is called as a floor. And if the interest rates increase, the maximum that you have to pay and the maximum that an investor would receive would be 8%. Okay? And these are of course examples, so don't remember them. Are we good to move on? So cap is the maximum coupon rate that issuer must pay, and floor, minimum coupon rate that bondholder will receive on any coupon date.